What would you do if helping a stranger meant losing your only chance to save your family? This is the story of a single father, a former soldier on the verge of despair, who was running to the most important interview of his life. But in the pouring rain, fate tested him, a woman stranded on the side of the road, desperately needing help. He knew that stopping would cost him everything, and yet he did it. What happened next will shock you. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching, and at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now let's get started. I woke up before the alarm. It was still dark, the kind of early hour when silence feels heavy, when every sound in the apartment seems magnified, the dripping of the bathroom faucet, the hum of the old refrigerator, the restless turning of my little boy in his bed. For a moment, I lay there staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the day press against my chest. Today was supposed to be the last chance. Not just another interview, not just another attempt to claw my way back into dignity. It was the moment everything had been building toward, or collapsing into. The army taught me how to survive in the desert, how to move quietly in the dark, how to keep breathing when all your instincts told you to shut down. But it never taught me how to survive this. The bills piled on the counter, the debt collector's voicemails I couldn't bear to delete, the polite but cold letters from the landlord hinting at eviction. My son was 7. Too young to carry the truth of his father's failures, but old enough to feel the cracks in the life we lived. He asked once why the lights flickered sometimes, why dinner was just bread and peanut butter 3 nights in a row. I told him it was a game. I told him soldiers had to learn how to live on little. He smiled at that, proud of me, proud of himself. That smile cut deeper than any battlefield wound I'd ever known. I got up, careful not to wake him. His hair was messy, sticking up in every direction, his small chest rising and falling under the thin blanket. I paused by his bed, my hand brushing the edge of the mattress. "I'll fix this," I whispered, though he couldn't hear. "I'll fix everything. Just one more chance." The suit hanging in the corner was borrowed. A neighbor 2 floors down had given it to me, pressing it into my arms with a quiet nod, not asking why I needed it. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was the closest thing I had to armor for the day ahead. I shaved with trembling hands, nicking my chin, watching a bead of blood slide down my jaw. It looked like war paint in the mirror, though I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was just a father trying not to drown. The interview was at 9:30 sharp. A logistics firm. Big enough to pay well, structured enough to offer stability, desperate enough to give a man like me one final chance. I had rehearsed my answers all night, whispering them in the dark while my son slept, practicing the steady voice of a man who still believed in himself. The truth was, I barely did. But for him, for that boy with the messy hair and wide eyes, I had to pretend. I checked the clock again, my chest tightening with each passing minute. Time was moving too fast, the city outside waking up with an urgency I wasn't ready for. I slipped on the jacket, ran my fingers over the worn lapel, and stood by the door. My son stirred then, his eyes half open, his voice heavy with sleep. "Daddy, you'll be back." I forced a smile. "Of course. I'll be back, and maybe tonight we'll have something special for dinner." He smiled faintly, trusting me without question. That trust terrified me more than anything else. I kissed his forehead and left, locking the door behind me. As I stepped into the cold morning air, the city stretched before me like a battlefield I didn't know how to win. My heart was steady, my steps purposeful, but deep inside, I knew this was it. There were no more backup plans, no more second chances. Today, I either saved our lives, or I watched them fall apart. And yet, somewhere in that heavy silence of dawn, I felt the faintest whisper of something else, as if fate was waiting for me just around the corner, ready to test not my answers in an interview room, but the very core of who I was. The bus hissed as it pulled away from the curb, leaving me standing alone on the cracked sidewalk with my suit jacket pulled tight against the morning chill. The clouds had gathered quicker than I expected, heavy and low, the kind of gray that warns you a storm is coming whether you're ready or not. I glanced at my watch, still time if I moved quickly, still a chance to arrive early and make the right impression. Every step I took, I whispered silently to myself, don't be late. Don't let him down. Him, my boy, my anchor. The street was crowded with commuters, umbrellas already opening as the first drops of rain began to fall. I didn't carry one. Couldn't risk spending on things that weren't absolutely necessary. My shoes were old leather, and I felt the damp creeping in almost instantly, but I forced myself not to look down, not to think about the wet socks I'd be carrying into the office. I just walked faster, rehearsing those same polished answers in my head, about responsibility, discipline, leadership. Words I hoped would hide the desperation underneath. That was when I saw her. A car, a sleek black sedan, was stopped awkwardly in the middle of the lane, hazard lights flashing. The driver's door stood open, and beside it, a woman struggled with the hood, her hair plastered to her face by the rain that was now coming down in sheets. Drivers honked as they swerved around her, some shouting curses through cracked windows, but no one stopped. She was drenched, shivering, tugging helplessly at metal that refused to move. I slowed. My chest tightened. This wasn't my problem. Not today. Not when everything was on the line. I could already hear the clock ticking louder, each second whispering that I was running out of time, that one kind gesture could cost me the only chance I had left. I told myself to keep walking. Soldiers learn discipline. Priorities. Mission first. And my mission was clear: get to that office, shake hands, speak steady, secure the job. That was survival. That was how I kept a roof over my son's head. But then, I saw her stumble. She slipped on the slick pavement, caught herself against the hood, and for just a second her face turned up toward the sky, eyes squeezed shut, mouth trembling in defeat. Not frustration. Not anger. Defeat. The look of someone who had run out of strength, who was just hoping someone, anyone, would care enough to see her. I stopped. My heart hammered in my chest. The voices in my head clashed, the desperate father running toward salvation, and the soldier who had sworn never to leave anyone behind. I thought of my son, the way he trusted me to be a man worth admiring, a man who did the right thing even when no one was watching. If I walked past her now, if I let her drown in that rain while I saved myself, what kind of man would I be when I looked in the mirror tomorrow? I stepped into the street. "Ma'am," I called out, raising my voice above the roar of engines and rain, "let me help." She turned, startled, her hair clinging to her cheeks, mascara streaked like shadows under her eyes. "It won't start," she shouted back. Her voice cracked with frustration. "It just died on me." I pushed the hood open fully, wincing as the rain poured into the engine bay. I wasn't a mechanic, but years in the field had taught me enough about engines to survive in worse places than this. My hands moved instinctively, checking connections, adjusting a loose cable. "Try it now," I yelled. She climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key. Nothing. Just a hollow click. I cursed under my breath, my clothes already soaked through, my watch ticking toward doom. "One more time," I said firmly, tightening the cable with bare fingers until they burned. She turned the key again. This time the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, headlights flaring against the wall of rain. Her eyes widened, relief flooding her face. She leapt out of the car, laughing in disbelief. "You did it," she shouted, clutching her coat around her shoulders. I nodded, wiping the rain from my brow. "You're good to go now. Just keep it running until you get home." For a moment, she just looked at me, really looked, as if trying to understand why a stranger in a soaked, ill-fitting suit had stopped his entire world to fix hers. I didn't wait for thanks. I just stepped back, pulled my jacket tighter, and started walking again. Behind me, her voice carried faintly through the storm. "Wait. Please, at least tell me your name." But I didn't turn. I couldn't. Time had slipped through my fingers. The interview clock was gone, and all I had left was the pounding of rain in my ears and the certainty that I had just traded my last chance for something I couldn't name. My shoes squelched as I ran the last blocks, my heart in my throat. The office tower finally rose before me, gleaming and merciless. I checked my watch, late. Too late. And as I stood there, soaked and shivering in the lobby, I realized I had chosen. I had chosen to help a stranger instead of saving myself. And deep down, though despair threatened to crush me, something whispered that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the wrong choice. I must have looked like a drowned animal when I finally stepped inside the building. The receptionist's eyes flicked up from her computer screen, then quickly down again, as if the sight of me was too uncomfortable to hold. My jacket clung to me like a second skin, water dripping steadily onto their polished marble floor. I tried to smile, tried to stand straighter, but even my shoes betrayed me, squeaking loudly with every step toward the desk. "Good morning," I said, though my voice cracked. "I'm here for the 9:30 interview. James Carter." The woman didn't return my smile. She tapped her keyboard, eyes narrowing slightly. "Mr. Carter," she repeated. I nodded, relieved that she had found my name. But then her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm afraid that interview has been cancelled." The words hit me harder than any bullet ever had. "Cancelled?" I asked, unable to keep the edge of panic from my tone. There must be some mistake. I was invited last week, confirmed by email. This opportunity, this is the only. She cut me off with professional coldness. The hiring manager decided to move forward with other candidates. "I'm sorry." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. All those hours rehearsing, all the nights whispering answers in the dark while my boy slept, all the hope I had balanced on this single moment, it collapsed like a house of cards. My throat burned. "Please," I said softly, leaning closer. "If you could reschedule me, give me 10 minutes, 5 even, I can explain why I'm late." Her gaze lingered on the puddle forming at my feet. "I'm afraid rescheduling isn't possible. We have very strict protocols. Once the opportunity is closed, it's closed." I wanted to shout that I wasn't late because of carelessness, that I had stopped to help someone who needed me, that I had chosen to be human in a world that demanded indifference. But the words stuck in my chest. Would she even care? To her, I was just another desperate applicant, another name to cross off the list. I turned away slowly, my body heavy, as if every step pulled me deeper into the floor. The lobby seemed colder now, brighter in its indifference, every polished corner reflecting back the image of a man who had already failed before even entering the arena. I pushed through the glass doors, back into the rain, and the city swallowed me whole. I walked aimlessly for blocks, the storm soaking me again, though this time I barely noticed. My mind replayed my son's sleepy smile that morning, the trust in his small voice when he asked if I'd be back. How would I face him tonight? What would I say when he looked at me with those wide eyes, waiting for the good news I had promised? The weight of it broke me. I ducked into an alley and leaned against the wall, covering my face with trembling hands. I hadn't cried in years, not in the field, not when friends were buried, not even when my wife left me with nothing but a son and a hollow promise. But now, in the shadow of skyscrapers and the roar of rain, I let it come. Silent, shaking sobs, swallowed by the storm. I thought about how unfair it was, how one act of kindness had cost me everything. I thought about how the world rewarded coldness and punished compassion. And for a moment, I hated myself for stopping. But then, just as quickly, another thought pierced through the fog: if my son had been watching, if he had seen me choose between rushing to save myself and stopping to help a stranger, what would he have learned? What kind of man would I have been teaching him to become? I wiped my face with my sleeve, straightened my shoulders, and forced myself back into the crowd. The despair still burned in my chest, but somewhere underneath it, a quieter truth whispered that maybe this story wasn't finished. Maybe sacrifice carried its own weight, invisible but not meaningless. At that moment, I didn't know that fate had already begun to turn, that the stranger I had pulled from the rain would not simply vanish into the blur of the city. I didn't know that the very thing that had destroyed my chance would, in time, open another door I hadn't even imagined. All I knew was that for now, I had failed. And failure never felt heavier than when I pictured the small figure waiting for me at home, still believing his father could win. I don't remember how long I wandered that morning, just that the rain never stopped. By the time I made it back toward our neighborhood, the streets shimmered with shallow rivers, and I felt hollow inside. My soaked suit clung to me like a costume that no longer belonged, and all I could think of was the look I'd see in my boy's eyes when I walked through the door with nothing to show for the day. I'd left him with a promise, and I was returning with empty hands. I stopped at a small cafe near the bus stop, not for coffee, I had no spare coins for that, but just to sit under a roof and breathe. The place smelled of burnt grounds and wet coats. I kept my head low, hoping no one would notice the man dripping all over their clean floor. My reflection in the fogged window looked like a stranger, tired, beaten, eyes dulled by failure. That was when I heard the sound of heels clicking against tile, steady and confident. A voice followed, warm, deliberate. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Carter?" I looked up, startled. Standing before me was the same woman I had helped in the storm, her black sedan rescued by my trembling hands only hours earlier. Except now, she was transformed. The rain-soaked stranger had become a figure of poise, her tailored coat sharp, her hair swept neatly back, her presence filling the tiny cafe as if it were her stage. "Yes," I said slowly, unsure if I was imagining it. She smiled faintly, though her eyes carried something sharper, like curiosity mixed with recognition. "I owe you thanks. You didn't have to stop today, but you did." And I couldn't shake the thought that most people would have just walked past. I shrugged, embarrassed. It wasn't much. Just an engine cable. "It was more than that," she replied, sliding into the seat across from me. She extended her hand, clean and manicured, a stark contrast to mine, still raw from tightening bolts in the rain. "I'm Claire Donovan." The name meant nothing to me, though something in the way she said it suggested it should. "I didn't expect to see you again," I admitted. Her gaze lingered on me for a long moment. That's the thing about cities, they're big until the right people cross paths. Then they feel very small. She paused, studying me as if weighing whether to reveal something. "May I ask, why did you help me, knowing you'd be late for wherever you were going?" The question cut through me. I could have lied, could have spun some story about having extra time or not caring about my destination, but the exhaustion in me left no room for masks. "Because my son is watching," I said simply. Even if he wasn't there, even if he never finds out, I knew the man I want him to believe I am wouldn't walk past someone who needed help. Her eyes softened. She leaned back slightly, as though letting the words settle between us. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "And did you make it on time?" I laughed bitterly. "I made it to the building. But they closed the door. No chance to explain, no second meeting. Just, done." For the first time, she looked unsettled. Her lips pressed together, her gaze drifting toward the rain streaking down the cafe window. "And yet, you don't regret it?" I shook my head. Regret would mean I wished I had walked away. I can't teach my boy that lesson. Even if it costs us everything. Silence stretched between us. Then she leaned forward, her voice lower, more deliberate. "Mr. Carter, what if I told you that the interview you missed was at my company?" The air left my lungs. I blinked, unsure I'd heard her correctly. "I'm the CEO of Donovan Logistics," she continued, her tone calm but edged with something like challenge. "The very place you were heading this morning." The world seemed to tilt. All at once, the humiliation of the lobby, the cold refusal, the loss I had carried, it all rearranged itself into something I couldn't yet comprehend. "And now," she said softly, I'm asking myself whether a man who sacrifices his own chance to help a stranger might be exactly the kind of person I've been searching for. I sat frozen, drenched and speechless, as the storm outside gave way to a strange and unexpected calm. For a long moment, I could only stare at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. My mind tried to grasp the enormity of it. The stranger I had stopped to help in the storm was not just a stranded woman with a broken engine. She was the very person whose company had just turned me away without a glance. Fate had taken my sacrifice and twisted it into something I couldn't yet name. Claire Donovan studied me with a quiet steadiness, her fingers wrapped loosely around the coffee cup she hadn't touched. Her eyes were sharp, but not cruel. There was a weight in them, like she was used to people breaking under her gaze. I wasn't sure if I was breaking or simply stripped bare, every lie and excuse already burned away by the morning storm. "You should know," she said at last, "that I don't make decisions based on pity. I built Donovan Logistics from the ground up, and sentiment has no place in survival. If you're expecting me to offer you the position you missed this morning, you'll be disappointed." Her words cut, but I forced myself to sit straighter, to meet her eyes without flinching. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm not asking for anything." My voice was hoarse, but steady. "I did what I thought was right, and if that means my son and I keep struggling, then so be it." Something flickered in her expression, the faintest suggestion of respect. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Good. Because what I need isn't someone chasing a title. What I need is someone who can hold their ground when everything around them is falling apart. Tell me, Mr. Carter, can you do that?" I swallowed hard. I've been a soldier. I've seen what it means to hold the line when no one else can. But those medals don't pay rent. All I can tell you is this: I won't back down when it matters. She nodded slowly, as though she had been waiting for those exact words. Then she said something that made my pulse quicken. "Our company is in crisis. A real one. The logistics system that keeps our entire network running has failed, and millions are bleeding away every hour. My staff are brilliant, but they're panicked, protective of their pride. What I need is someone unafraid to step into chaos, someone who doesn't fold under pressure. You proved that much this morning, but the question is, can you prove it again?" I stared at her, stunned. "You want me to, what? Walk into your headquarters and fix what your own team of experts can't?" She didn't flinch. "Yes." For a moment, the cafe noise faded. All I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat. I thought of my boy waiting at home, of the empty refrigerator, of the debts pressing down on us like a noose. This was madness. I had no credentials in logistics, no degrees on my wall, only the instincts of a soldier and the discipline of a father trying to survive. But what other choice did I have? "You don't know me," I said finally, my voice low. "You don't know if I'll succeed or fail. Why take that risk?" Her answer was immediate. "Because character isn't written on a resume. It's revealed in the rain, when no one is watching. And today, you revealed yours." I felt the weight of her words sink into me. For the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at my failures, my debts, my scars. She was looking at me, at who I was beneath it all. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes life doesn't give you chances the way you expect them. Sometimes it tests you in the storm before it hands you the key. I drew a long breath, then nodded. "All right. If you're serious, then yes. I'll take the risk." A faint smile tugged at her lips, though her eyes remained steady. "Good. Then be ready. Because the moment you walk into my headquarters, you'll find enemies waiting for you. Not everyone will want you to succeed." I leaned back, my heart pounding, my hands trembling beneath the table. I had no idea what I was walking into, only that the path ahead was darker and sharper than anything I had imagined when I woke up this morning. But for the first time in a long while, it wasn't despair I felt. It was purpose. When Claire's black sedan pulled up in front of the towering glass building that bore her name, I felt my throat tighten. Donovan Logistics. I had seen its logo stamped on trucks that thundered down highways, on containers at the docks, on billboards promising efficiency and reliability. It was a world away from my small apartment with peeling paint and unpaid bills stacked on the counter. And now, somehow, I was about to walk inside as though I belonged. Claire stepped out first, every inch the leader she clearly was. The security guards at the door stiffened, nodded, and moved aside with practiced deference. I followed her, drenched suit now dried stiff from hours of wear, shoes scuffed, hair still damp. I caught the glance of one guard, the faint narrowing of his eyes, the question unspoken, "Who is this man beside her?" I ignored it, but inside, I wondered the same. The lobby smelled of polished marble and money. Screens on the walls flickered with maps of shipping routes, stock updates, graphs I barely understood. The receptionist smiled at Claire, then froze when she saw me trailing behind. Claire didn't bother to explain. She simply said, "He's with me." That was enough. For her, at least. The elevator ride was silent. She didn't look at me, didn't offer reassurance. She didn't need to. Her confidence filled the space more than words ever could. When the doors opened on the executive floor, the atmosphere changed immediately. A dozen eyes turned, startled to see me, then sharpened with something colder. Suits leaned toward one another, whispering. I knew that look, suspicion, resistance. I had worn it myself once when an outsider entered a platoon. Claire strode ahead, leading me into a vast boardroom where monitors displayed chaotic lines of code and logistics schedules blinking red with errors. "This," she said simply, "is where you begin." At the far end of the table stood a man in his 40s, tall, sharp-featured, his suit immaculate, his expression far from welcoming. He didn't rise when we entered. "Claire," he said smoothly, "you didn't mention you were bringing company." "This is James Carter," Claire replied. "He's here to help." The man's eyes flicked over me, dismissive. "Help? With what, exactly?" "This is a logistics crisis, not a roadside rescue." I felt the sting of his words but said nothing. Claire's gaze didn't waver. "He's here because he sees what others miss." The man leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Really? And what qualifications does he have?" "Because my engineers and analysts have been tearing at this system for 3 days, and none of them have cracked it. But I suppose a soldier," his tone dripped with condescension, "might have a miracle in his pocket." I finally spoke. My voice was steady, though my pulse hammered. "I don't have a miracle. Just discipline. And sometimes that's what saves you when everything else fails." A murmur rippled through the room. The man studied me for a moment longer, then turned to Claire. "If this goes wrong, it's on you." "It always has been," she replied coolly. Then to me, "Mr. Carter, the system is yours. Show them what you can do." I moved closer to the monitors, ignoring the skeptical stares. The screens displayed routes, shipments, connections, a labyrinth of information bleeding red with delays. I didn't understand every detail, but I understood patterns, pressure points, weak spots in a structure ready to collapse. Years in the field had taught me to see the gaps, the overlooked details that spelled disaster. I asked for data logs. They hesitated, clearly reluctant to hand anything over to an outsider. Claire's voice cut through the tension. "Give him what he asks for." Within minutes, I was scrolling through files, tracing disruptions back through the network. The staff shifted impatiently, muttering. I ignored them, leaning closer, my mind locking into the rhythm of problem-solving I hadn't felt since war rooms overseas. Then I saw it, a loop, small but fatal. A corrupted link that kept rerouting shipments through non-existent hubs, creating a cascade of failures. "Here," I said firmly, pointing to the line of code. "This is your leak. Fix that, and the system stabilizes." The room fell silent. One of the engineers leaned in, frowning, typing furiously. Seconds later, the red alerts began to fade, one by one, replaced with green. The CTO, for that's who he clearly was, stiffened, his smirk gone. Claire's lips curved just slightly, though her eyes remained cold. "Gentlemen," she said, "I believe Mr. Carter just saved us millions." For the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten, not pity, not dismissal, but respect. And yet, in the silence that followed, I also felt the heat of resentment building across the table. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. The silence in the room was heavy, the kind that presses down on you like a weight. The red warnings on the monitors had shifted to green, yet no one spoke, as if admitting what had just happened would cost them too much pride. I stood there dripping with sweat despite the air conditioning, my hands still hovering over the keyboard, my heart pounding with the strange mix of victory and dread. Then came the voice I had expected, smooth, cutting, full of concealed anger. The CTO pushed himself up from his chair, straightening his tie as though he had just been insulted. "So you found a bug," he said. "Congratulations. But this system is vast, Mr. Carter. It is not a rifle you can clean and reload. It's a living network, one that requires expertise you don't have." His words might have intimidated another man, but I had heard worse on nights when mortar fire lit the desert sky. I kept my voice steady. "It wasn't just a bug. It was a choke point no one saw because you were looking too far ahead and not at the base of the structure. Logistics isn't just software. It's about pressure, timing, and survival. That I understand." Murmurs filled the room. A few of the engineers avoided my eyes, perhaps embarrassed, perhaps curious. Claire remained silent, her expression unreadable, though I noticed the faintest glimmer of satisfaction behind her calm. I leaned closer to the screen again, scrolling through the history of system operations. My instincts whispered that what I'd seen was only the surface. The pattern of failures didn't look random, it looked deliberate, like someone had set the system to eat itself piece by piece. I asked for deeper logs, backups stored off-site. The CTO stiffened. "Those files are restricted." "Restricted?" I repeated. "You're hemorrhaging millions by the hour and you want to play gatekeeper?" His jaw tightened. "We have protocols." Claire's voice sliced through the standoff. "Give him the files." The CTO glared at her, then at me, before finally signaling to an assistant. The files appeared on the screen, layer upon layer of operations data. I scanned them quickly, my eyes catching irregularities, false timestamps, ghost shipments routed through ports that didn't exist, warehouses that had been decommissioned years ago still showing activity. My gut twisted. This wasn't incompetence. This was sabotage. I turned to face the room. "Someone is bleeding your system on purpose. This isn't an accident. It's internal." The room erupted, voices overlapping, disbelief, denial. One engineer snapped, "That's impossible. We're vetted. We've been here for years." "Which makes it the perfect cover," I said firmly. "I've seen operations collapse from the inside before. The enemy doesn't always wear a different uniform. Sometimes he sits right beside you." The CTO slammed his hand on the table. "You're accusing my team of treachery on your first day here. Who even are you to speak to us this way?" I held his gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm the man who fixed what you couldn't in 3 days. And now I'm telling you the truth, whether you like it or not." The air turned electric. For a moment I thought he might lunge at me, but then Claire rose slowly from her seat. The room fell silent at once. She walked toward the monitors, her eyes scanning the evidence I had uncovered. When she finally spoke, her tone was ice. "He's right." Gasps rippled through the staff. Claire continued, calm but firm. "I've suspected for weeks that this collapse was more than technical. I wanted proof. Now I have it." She turned to me. "And you've given it to me. The CTO's face reddened, his composure cracking. You can't seriously trust this outsider over your own chief technology officer. Her reply was steady, final. Trust isn't given. It's earned. And today, Mr. Carter has earned mine. The CTO's mouth opened, then closed, fury simmering beneath the surface. He turned away, muttering under his breath, but I caught the venom in his eyes. This battle wasn't over. He would not forgive me for exposing the rot inside his empire. As the meeting dissolved into frantic chatter, Claire leaned closer, her voice low enough for only me to hear. You've stepped into more than a crisis, Mr. Carter. You've stepped into a war. And now everyone will be watching to see if you survive it. I straightened my shoulders, the soldier in me rising again. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving for myself. I was fighting for something larger, a place, a purpose, maybe even a chance to rebuild the life I thought was lost. But I knew one thing as I left that boardroom: the system wasn't the only thing under attack. From now on, so was I. The hours that followed were a blur of tension. Engineers hunched over their screens, analysts scribbled notes, managers whispered frantically into headsets. Yet no matter how busy the room looked, I could feel the undercurrent directed at me: suspicion, resentment, and the quiet fury of those who believed I had humiliated them in front of their leader. Claire had given me her support, but her support was both shield and target. I could sense the storm gathering long before the first strike came. By the second day, whispers had begun to travel through the corridors. As I passed groups of staff, conversations stopped abruptly, eyes turned away, and the silence was louder than any insult. At first, I tried to ignore it. Soldiers are taught to endure isolation, to keep moving forward despite the hostility of those around them. But whispers have a way of growing teeth. It started with small things: a report I had requested never reaching my desk, a login mysteriously disabled, meetings scheduled without my knowledge. When I asked about it, the answers were always the same: must have been a mistake, must have been a glitch. But I had seen sabotage before, and this was sabotage dressed up as coincidence. Late one evening, when most of the office had cleared out, I returned to my workstation and found a folder lying open on the desk. Inside were printed pages of internal memos with my name circled in red ink, accusations scribbled across the margins: unqualified, Claire's charity case, security risk. My chest tightened as I flipped through them. It was a campaign, deliberate and relentless, designed to strip me of credibility before I had even found my footing. The next morning, I confronted the only man brazen enough to orchestrate it. The CTO. He was in his glass-walled office, sipping espresso as though the world were perfectly in order. I walked in without knocking. You're behind this, I said, dropping the folder onto his desk. He glanced at the papers without a flicker of concern. I don't know what you're talking about. Cut the act, I snapped. You've been undermining me since the moment I walked in. You think I don't see it? The whispers, the missing files, the lies. You want me out of here. Finally, his eyes lifted to meet mine, cold and sharp. You don't belong here, he said evenly. This is a company built on precision, not on broken soldiers looking for a second chance. Claire may be blinded by your little display of heroism in the rain, but the rest of us aren't. You're a liability. I leaned closer, my voice low, steady. The only liability I see is a man willing to watch his company burn rather than admit someone else saw what he missed. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two men locked in a silent battlefield. Then he smiled, thin and venomous. Enjoy your time here, Mr. Carter. Because when you fall, and you will, it won't be the system that fails. It will be you. I left his office, my blood boiling, but I forced myself to walk calmly. He wanted me rattled, wanted me angry enough to make a mistake. I couldn't give him that satisfaction. Still, I knew the fight had shifted. It was no longer about saving logistics or proving my worth. It had become personal, a war in the shadows of the very company I had been asked to protect. That evening, Claire called me into her office. She stood by the window, city lights flickering behind her like distant stars. "I've been hearing the noise," she said quietly. "Rumors. Complaints. Even a petition from senior staff demanding I remove you from the project." I felt my chest tighten. "And what do you think?" She turned, her eyes steady. "I think people fight hardest against the change they fear most. And right now, you represent change." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But you need to understand, James, this will not stop. They will test you, break you if they can. The only way to survive is to show them what you showed me, that your strength doesn't come from titles, but from character." Her words steadied me, though the weight of them was heavy. I nodded, though inside I wondered how many battles a man could fight before breaking. When I left the building that night, the city air was cold, biting. I thought of my son waiting at home, his small frame curled under thin blankets, trusting that his father would keep him safe. That thought burned away the doubt. I could endure whispers, sabotage, even the hatred of a man like the CTO. But I would not fail the boy who looked at me like I was his hero. And so I resolved, if this was war, then I would fight it as I had fought every battle before, not for glory, not for recognition, but for survival. And in the end, I knew the truth, men like the CTO relied on fear. But I had lived too long with fear to let it control me now. The following week felt like marching through a battlefield where every shadow held a trap. The CTO's people no longer bothered to hide their disdain. They rolled their eyes when I spoke, withheld data until deadlines passed, and treated every success I brought as if it were a mistake waiting to happen. And yet, for every attempt to trip me, I reminded myself of one truth: they were protecting their pride, not their company. The company itself, its survival, its workers, its future, was the reason I kept walking into those glass doors every morning. Still, I felt the cracks forming in me. Nights at home, I sat on the edge of my son's bed long after he had fallen asleep, listening to the sound of his breathing, whispering promises into the darkness. "I'll make it right. Just hold on." But some nights, when the silence grew too heavy, I wondered whether I was lying to him. Then came the turning point. The system suffered another shock, a near collapse that froze shipments across 3 ports in one night. Panic spread through the headquarters like fire. Executives argued in the boardroom, engineers shouted over one another, and the CTO seized the chaos as his chance to crush me. "This is what happens," he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the room, "when we trust an unqualified outsider over professionals who have built this company for decades. Carter's interference has cost us dearly, and I demand he be removed immediately." All eyes turned to me. For a heartbeat, I felt the weight of 100 stairs pressing down, waiting to see if I would fold. But then I remembered my boy's face the morning I had left for that first interview, the trust in his sleepy eyes. That memory lit something inside me. I stepped forward. "Remove me if you want," I said, my voice steady but loud enough to cut through the chaos. "But before you do, look at the data. Look at the ports that were targeted. Look at the timing. This isn't random, and it isn't failure. It's a pattern. Someone is feeding your system false inputs, rerouting shipments to choke you at your weakest points. If you can't see it, then you've already lost. But if you give me 30 minutes, just 30, I'll show you exactly where the knife is hidden." The room fell silent. The CTO sneered, but Claire raised her hand, silencing him. "You have 30 minutes, she said." I dove into the system with the intensity of a soldier clearing a minefield. Fingers flying across the keyboard, I traced the false signals back to their source, an access point buried in the network that only a handful of executives could reach. And when the code revealed its final signature, the room gasped. The sabotage led back not to some faceless hacker, but to an account created under the CTO's own credentials. Claire's eyes locked on him, sharp as glass. "Care to explain this?" His face drained of color, his composure cracking. He stammered excuses, claiming he had been hacked, that someone was framing him. But the evidence was merciless. Engineers confirmed it. Managers whispered in shock. And then Claire stood, her voice like a gavel striking the table. You tried to poison the company you were trusted to protect. You undermined the man who saved it. You're finished here. Security entered within minutes, and the CTO's protests echoed uselessly down the hall as he was escorted out. The boardroom remained still, the tension broken only by the soft hum of systems returning to life on the monitors. One by one, the red alerts shifted to green. Claire turned back to me. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steady, "you've done more in 2 weeks than some of my executives have done in years. You saw the truth when others were blinded by ego. As of today, you're not just an advisor. You're part of this company, officially." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, rippling through the room. Some faces still carried reluctance, but others showed something I hadn't seen before: respect. Real respect. I stood there, stunned, unable to move, my throat thick with emotion. For the first time in years, I felt I had a place. A purpose beyond survival. Not charity, not pity, recognition. And as I walked out of that boardroom, Claire at my side, I thought of my son waiting at home, the boy who believed his father was still a hero. Tonight, for once, I could tell him the truth: his faith had not been wasted. The train ride back felt different that evening. For once, I wasn't slouched in my seat, staring out the window as shadows of debt and failure pressed against the glass. Instead, I sat upright, my heart strangely light, though my clothes were still the same worn suit and my shoes still carried the marks of long days. I carried no paycheck yet, no contract in my pocket, but I carried something better: certainty. Certainty that tomorrow had a place for me, and that I had earned it not through luck or pity but by standing firm when it mattered most. When I stepped off at our stop, the air was cool, the city quieter than usual, as if even the streets had paused to let me breathe. The apartment complex loomed in the distance, familiar and tired, with its cracked walls and dim stairwell lights. But for the first time in years, I didn't see it as a cage. I saw it as the place where a chapter was closing, where my son and I had endured our hardest days, and from which we would now begin again. I opened the door quietly. The smell of cheap soup hung in the air, and my boy sat at the table, bent over a notebook, tongue between his teeth as he tried to trace words on the lined paper. He looked up when he heard me, and his face lit up in a way that made every bruise life had left on me feel worth it. "Daddy," he shouted, running toward me. His arms wrapped around my waist, his small frame pressing against me like he was anchoring me to the ground. "You're back. Did it go good? Did they say yes?" I swallowed hard, my throat burning with emotion. I knelt so I could look him in the eye. His hair was messy again, his cheeks flushed from excitement, his eyes wide and waiting for the truth. For once, I didn't have to lie. "It went better than good," I told him softly. "They saw me, son. They saw who I am, and they gave me a chance. A real chance. Things are going to change." He blinked, as if trying to measure the weight of my words. "So, no more peanut butter dinners?" I laughed through the ache in my chest and ruffled his hair. "No more peanut butter dinners. We'll have real food. New clothes. Maybe even a place where the lights don't flicker." He grinned, the kind of grin that erases years of pain. Then, suddenly serious, he whispered, "I knew you could do it, Daddy. I never stopped knowing." Those words undid me. I pulled him close, holding him tighter than I ever had, feeling the fragility and strength of that little body in my arms. His faith had carried me through storms, through humiliation, through despair. And now, at last, I could give something back. Later that night, after he had fallen asleep clutching his toy soldier, I sat by the window with the city lights spilling across the floor. My reflection stared back at me, older, scarred, but alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought of Claire, of the boardroom, of the battle I had just begun inside those glass walls. There would be more fights ahead, more nights of doubt, more enemies waiting to test me. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I had learned something vital in these last weeks: a man isn't measured by the breaks he gets or the titles he earns. He's measured by what he does when no one is watching, when the world gives him a choice between saving himself and helping another. That choice had cost me once, but in the end, it had saved me too. I looked at my sleeping boy, his small hand curled around the blanket, his lips parted in dreams. And I whispered into the stillness, "One act, son. Just one act of kindness changed everything. Remember that when it's your turn to choose." The night was quiet, the storm finally gone. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that tomorrow held not just survival, but hope.